Hey kawan, welcome to EDCReady. Today we are doing a full review of this. This is the CRKT Pilar Large. One thing I gotta mention is that this knife was donated by thomastools.com.my, and in fact this is the first knife that has ever been donated to the channel. So if you wanna help support them, because they help support this channel, you can check out the link in the description box down below. That will help take you to their website. So without further ado, let's get into some measurements right here. We have here my calipers, my oh so accurately inaccurate calipers right here. We have here a blade length of right around 2.68, 2.65 or so inches, right around there. We have a blade stock thickness of, and it's a pretty thick blade, 0.16 inches, right around there. We have a handle thickness of 0.43 inches, a handle length of right pretty much about 4 inches, and then we also have a blade height, also very important in the pocket. It comes in at right around 1.24 inches. And another dimension we gotta measure is the weight dimension. We have here, it will measure in grams and we will have to convert it manually. Putting this on the scale, it comes in at 115 grams, which is right around 4 ounces. Now this knife right here, being a budget knife, I am going to be comparing it to other budget knives. We have here the Rat 2 in D2. However, this is a custom version from the EDC Nurse. And then these guys are pretty much right around the same price. And then we have here the Kershaw Natrix Copper. This is definitely more expensive than this guy, but I'm going to be talking mostly about the base version of this guy right here. So without further ado, let's get into the review of this knife. Let's start with the blade, because as always, we go from tip to butt. The blade here is an 8CR13 MOV steel. I do not know if they mark it. I don't think they mark it on this steel. But 8CR13 MOV is a very budget steel. It's very much on the budget end of the steel category. It's definitely better than your stainless steel or whatever. But it is not as good as like your D2 in terms of edge retention and toughness. It's not as good as 440C, which is one of my favorite budget steels. It's not as good as 14C28N, which is another one of my favorite budget steels, or VG10. Definitely not that good. You got a couple good things going for it. If you guys like to sharpen, it's going to be pretty easy to sharpen. It is quite stain resistant as well. In terms of edge holding ability, it's not going to be it's not that great, which is why I'm not such a big fan of this steel. However, the corrosion resistance is pretty good. So as a result of that, it's a knife that I kind of enjoyed carrying. It's not my favorite, but I did kind of enjoy carrying at the end. In terms of the price of it, it comes in at right around 40 USD, and I think that's a little bit pricey for this steel. Just to put that into context, the D2 on the Rat 2, not this one but the basic one, comes in at right around 37 USD. And then we have the Kershaw Natrix, the mini Natrix that runs 8CR13 MOV, that comes in at 30 USD. In fact, a lot of Ganzos come in D2 and 440C, and they're definitely cheaper than this guy. Later I'll explain to you what you're gonna be paying for this knife. That 40 USD does go to something in this knife. Now let's talk about the blade shape. It's definitely a pretty thick blade stock right here, and that you might think that kind of it's bad when it comes to slicing, but in fact the very tall grind right here means that it actually slices quite well. It does come to a pretty fine edge. It doesn't hold that edge for very long, but at the end of the day, it's not such a bad slicer. It definitely worked better than I thought it would be when I first read about the thickness of this blade stock. It's not the best, definitely. Like the Rat 2 slices a lot better. My Para 3 lightweight slices a lot better. But it's not as bad as I thought it would be. What I really like about this blade is that you have this amazing blade. The shape of the edge here is really great. You have a very shallow belly. The belly goes all the way around, but it has a few advantages. First of which is, I'm going to use my calipers to showcase this. Because of the small size of the flipper tab, you can almost get the entire blade to rock onto a surface. You can almost pretty much get to the right edge of the edge right there, and you can kind of rock the whole thing on the blade. Other knives, such as this knife right here, the flipper tab kind of protrudes out, and hence you can't get most of the blade. In fact, you can get most of the blade, but you can't get all the blade down onto the cutting board. Well, this guy you can, and that's a very genius and very good blade edge design, which I really like. Now granted, it's not going to be a big deal if you do any kind of like floating kind of cuts, but if you're cutting down to a board or whatever, that's gonna be really helpful. Another thing that's really nice about this is because it has this very not flat but very shallow bladed knife. fantastic for these kind of cuts, this kind of utility cuts, which I use on a daily basis. I use it mostly to cut up boxes. If you cut foam, you're going to cut like that. If you cut open tape or whatever, you're going to cut like that. Really great. You're not going to get a lot of slicing cuts if you were cutting vegetables or whatever, but you're going to get a lot of great pull cuts. And I really like that blade shape, that edge shape on this knife. Another thing I really like is that you have this little drop here in this blade right here, and this little drop makes it very ergonomic to put your thumb in, that you can add in a little bit more pressure when you push, but also great because when you have your index finger here, that little hike up, that little spike up means that you can press into this tip even more effectively. So let's say you need to penetrate anything, you can use this and you can kind of just press it in like that. You have a little bit more force that goes into here. I don't really have another blade. This is not too bad. You also have a little up sweep here that you can press into, but this is even more pronounced, and this is going to be even better if you need to do any kind of those penetrating cuts. And it also helps out by having a pretty strong tip. Okay, the tip of this knife is relatively beefy compared to the tip of the rat tool here. This definitely has a thicker tip, which means that it's going to be quite a bit more durable to cut. One thing I do not like about this knife is that the opening hole. Now, the opening hole, you have many opening hole designs out there. This is one of my least favorite. It's not very comfortable because unlike with other opening holes, you have a rounded side that goes into the side you are pressing up with. You're pressing up on. On this one, you have the flat side, and that is the side that you are pressing up on. So that just doesn't give you a lot of. It doesn't give you a lot of leverage. It's fine on the flick, but on the thumb opening, it's not going to be the greatest. Okay, you really have to angle your finger in a very weird direction to kind of push it out like that. And that took some doing for me, and that took some learning for me. But couple that with the fact that these inside edges here are relatively sharp. They're not like Spyderco Dragonfly sharp, but they're still really sharp. So it can become a pretty uncomfortable knife to use as a thumb opener, and just like that, you can kind of like dig into your thumb a little bit. It's not that bad, but it's not that great either. So that's just it with the blade. I'm not particularly a big fan of the steel, although it does have pretty high corrosion resistance. I do not like the thickness of the blade stock because it's really thick. I'd rather it be a bit more of a slicer. The sharpness of the insides of the hole here is not that great. Things I do like: amazing blade edge geometry, good nice high tall grind to compensate for the thick blade stock right here, great utility shape, okay, and a nice durable tip. Moving slightly back, it has a pretty big finger choil right here. Completely passes the plunge grind, so you can sharpen this all the way to the edge. And then, as you can see, I have small fingers, and I can fit my index finger, I can fit my ring finger, I can even fit my thumb in here with room to spare. So it's just a very nice finger choil. You can really choke it up all the way to the edge. You can really have a lot of strength and leverage there, especially with your thumb in the back here. You can do a lot of these kind of like wilting kind of push cuts that you would tend to do if you're, I know, carving or whatever. That's really great. Now, moving to one of my biggest gripes is the pivot. So the pivot itself is alright. It's a non-free spinning pivot, which is great, but it runs on Teflon washers. Now, Teflon washers are not the best kind of washers in my opinion. Here is one on here is one on phosphor bronze washers. Although it's layered, you have phosphor bronze and Teflon, and then you also have bearings here. Okay, so phosphor bronze, very good in terms of you're in a very dusty situation. It's much less likely that the dust or the sand or grit or whatever get into the washers. Okay, but it's still really smooth because it is metal on metal, and phosphor bronze is quite a bit of a softer metal, so it'll kind of like it will soften up and it'll kind of like self-lubricate over time, if that makes sense. You have bearings here, which are a bunch of balls in cages, and it creates a nice low contact point of friction kind of action right here. Also great. Phosphor bronze, although it has that benefit of being more durable in the sense that you can't get any kind of sand or dust or whatever between the washers and the blade because it's more of an enclosed space, but it doesn't have that smoothness that phosphor bronze has. Don't get me wrong, the knife is pretty alright in terms of smoothness. You don't get a lot of stick slip kind of action, but it does take a lot of effort to kind of push this back in compared to this guy, which is definitely a lot smoother because the phosphor bronze have kind of like not loosened up, but it has what's the word? It kind of well, it's definitely lubricated, and it has softened up over time as well. Softened up is not the right word. I'm kind of missing the word. It has smoothened out over time. There we go. So I'm not a big fan of the Teflon washers. Another problem with the Teflon washers is that they only go together in one direction. If I flip them around, your tolerances is going to be out. As you can see here, the centering is pretty good. But if you take it apart and then you put it back together, and then the Teflon washers are flipped the other direction, it is not going to center and the action is not going to be as good. Okay, so and then this kind of leads into this whole gripe about how this knife is kind of poorly made in total, which I will share with you guys a little bit later. Let's start with something that's good about the handles, which is that ergonomically, this is one of the best ergonomic knives I've ever had. I'm holding this in hand, it is very comfortable. All the edges here are chamfered and rounded. You have some nice purchase, great finger choil. I get full finger up in here. When you hold this, you feel like you have such a good level of control on the knife. You do get a bit of a hot spot of the clip, because the clip does kind of like ski jump up a little bit, and it can be a little bit sharp, but overall this is just extremely comfortable in the hand. Okay, let's move to the detent. The detent here is a little bit strong, which I kind of appreciate, because it kind of helps compensate the high friction of the Teflon washers, to the point that you can flick it out, flip it out, and flick it out again. However, it doesn't have a what you call it, a detent ball ramp. So it means sometimes when I unlock this knife, it kind of gets stuck onto the detent ball, and you kind of got to push it past that detent ball, rather than a knife with a detent ball ramp, where it kind of just makes that action a little bit smoother. And I know what you're saying, it's a budget knife, I can't expect too much, but these knives don't have that problem. I'm not sure if this guy has a detent ball track, but definitely it's a lot easier to get this up onto the blade, just like that. And it's also smoother. This guy as well, a lot easier to get up onto the blade. And I think one of the reasons why the detent is so strong is because it's not exactly the protuberance of the detent ball, but the frame lock itself is actually quite strong. The strength of the frame lock is quite strong. Now that does lead to a very solid feel. This knife feels like it has a very solid lockup. However, to disengage the lock, it does take more pressure than I'm used to with my other knives, and even then, you might not get the ball onto the detent track right here. As you can see, there we go. Whereas, and sometimes if you have any pressure on the lock bar, it's not gonna fire at all. You really gotta make sure your finger is off the lock bar, and then you can fire. The handle material itself is great. This one is a stainless steel. They do come with the G10 version. I prefer the G10 version. I've tried it. If you're gonna get one of these knives, get the G10 version. But the stainless steel version, it's a little bit heavier, but it has a nice, I think it's a bead blast finish, but it just gives a nice little texture. It has a nice matte texture. Now, this knife is very difficult to take apart. The first time I tried to take it apart, you can check out the disassembly video. I did not. I was not able to take it apart. When I took it to my friend Brian, who is kind of a mechanical wizard, he managed to take it apart using his tools. And once he loosened up all the screws, I can now take it apart myself and clean it out. However, I can't seem to put it back the right way that it came. For example, these are fine, but these screws, as you can see, some of the screws are sticking out and some of the screws are not sticking out. It doesn't matter how much I tighten it. It makes it worse at the back here, are free spinning as well, so I can't really tighten it all the way back in. So you get parts of the screw that's sticking out, parts of the screw that's flush, and even the back spacer here, you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see it, but the edges of the back spacers here are kind of like muffed up a little bit. They're not perfectly smooth. You know, you have some places that have gaps and some places that are sticking up over the handle, some places that stick below the handle. Overall, this is just a really poorly made knife in terms of fit and finish. You are paying, what are you paying that 40 USD for? You are not really paying it, you're not really paying it for the materials. You get better materials for cheaper knives from the Rats, from Gonzos, from a lot of brands out there. You know, Civivis are a great example for great fit and finish and quality and material for the price. You're not paying it for that. You are paying it for the design. This design is by Jesper Voxnes, right there. Voxnes design, which has become one of my favorite small knife designers out there. I've only ever held the Pilar, but I've checked out some of his stuff from Manjiro knives as well. Those are really nice as well. So you are really paying it for this wonderful, ergonomic, very utilitarian friendly design. Okay, so moving back, we have here the pocket clip. Now it does carry only on the right hand side, tip up and tip down. It came with the pocket clip on this side. I switched it over to this side because that is how I prefer to carry it. However, over time, you do have a little bit of surface rust that have built up over time. I'm sure with a little bit of TLC, you know, you get like a needle or something, I'm sure you can clean it up and scrape it off. but just keep that in mind. Sometimes if you don't have the screw there, you can kind of get some moisture there, and then you gotta be aware, you gotta lubricate this area as well. Pocket clip, it's not a deep carry pocket clip. It's not bad, but it's not deep carry. I always prefer a deep carry. The spring tension is pretty good. It holds its position in the pants really well. As I already mentioned just now, it does give a little bit of a hot spot, but at the end of the day, the clip is just an okay clip. It works, it functions. So now let's get into the conclusion. And the conclusion here is that this is a really beefy knife. Okay, you have great ergonomics for really like beefy work. You have a really beefy blade, pretty strong tip, but a beefy blade that has some pretty good slicing ability. It's not great, okay, it's not like Rat 2, it's not like Para 3 great, but it'll get the job done. The only thing is that you gotta remember, you gotta like sharpening, because you're gonna be doing it relatively often. I personally need to sharpen this knife myself. And what you are really paying for is that you are very much paying for the design. The design here, not only is it visually pleasing in my opinion, but it's also very comfortable in the hand, very great in the hand. Now you are gonna sacrifice some stuff when you get this knife. Number one is materials are not great. Okay, as already mentioned, 8CL13 MOV, you have stainless steel right here, pocket clip is so and so, you're gonna get some hot spots, you have a pretty strong lock bar which helps with improving the strength of the detent, but it just makes it a little bit more difficult for you to disengage the lock. You're running on Teflon washers, which is not great over time, and at the end of the day, it kind of, you gotta ask yourself what you need this knife for. Do you need this knife for really a bit more of a harder use, beefy, small knife, something that's more utilitarian friendly? This is going to be the knife for you. But if you're a bit of a knife snob, if you're the kind of person who likes a bit better engineering, a bit better machining, a bit better fit and finish, then this is not the knife for you. A couple of things I would suggest over this knife. The base Kershaw Natrix is the copper version in D2. This one belongs to Anas, which is a friend of mine who I still need to return this to. This knife, the base version comes in 8CR13 MOV at 30 USD. That comes with a much nicer action, much nicer detent, much nicer lock bar, much nicer and better construction all the way over. Another option is this guy right here. The Rat 2, the base level Rat 2, it comes in at about 37 USD last I checked. It comes in a D2 steel, which if you prefer edge retention and toughness, you go for the D2. It comes with a much better feeling handle, much better finished knife. It does also feel beefy in the handle, although the knife is definitely designed to be more of a slicer, definitely lighter and easier to carry in the pocket. Okay guys, that is my review for the CRKT Pilar Large. Don't forget to check out my Patreon account in the description down below, and as always, stay ready.